management responsibility for the regional mid-market sales team headquartered out of Cleveland, Ohio. In addition, he is also the acting liaison between Sterling Backcheck and People Matter. Finally, I'd like to cover some basic housekeeping items before we begin. First, we welcome your questions throughout the webinar. All you need to do is type them into the question window on the GoToWebinar control panel and hit submit. We'll get to as many questions as we can during the Q&A session after the main presentation. Second, we're recording today's webinar and we'll post it on the People Matter website within 24 hours. We'll send you an email once it's up in case you want to watch it again or forward it along to a friend. With that, I'd like to turn the program over to Anthony. Anthony, the floor is yours. Anthony, are you there? The floor is yours.
I am here. Thank you so much for another great introduction. Very happy to be here with everyone. Very happy to have an opportunity to speak with you today about pre-employment and retention risk mitigation. Well, some of you are very familiar with background screening, others of you not so much. So what we're going to do, of course, is walk you through a 500-foot view of why we should screen at all. And for those that are more familiar, we'll get more granulated and we'll answer those more specific best demonstrated practice type questions later in the conversation. So let's get started. Why screen? So why screen at all? Well, there are scores of reasons for this, but let's focus on some overarching reasons. Number one, risk mitigation. The whole process is about mitigating risk for hiring. Within this process, of course, we're going to need to do some due diligence. Due diligence comes in many layers, many objectives, and what the objective for you as an employer is to maximize all of the layers that you can to optimize the amount of risk that's mitigated. And then lastly, legal insulation. What we want to do is provide you with the ability to have some insulation in case you find yourself in a litigious situation. So let's keep this in mind. You may be the sole person or the sole company or the sole reason why two separate individuals happen to meet. And because of that, you may be accountable in some way. So think of this for a second. You may be at a restaurant and a customer's out of town and they come into your place of business. They're going to be having a meal. They would not meet your employees otherwise, that restaurant being there. So if something were to go wrong, you could find yourself in an accountable situation if something were to happen. So this is what we're talking about by being the sole reason why people get together. When those folks get together, the risks of that employment could impact you negatively. The challenge of this is finding a balance between your risk tolerance and the cost of doing the background check. All right, so there are multiple layers, multiple versions of background checks that allow for a certain amount of risk mitigation. Which versions of these background checks will fit your business accordingly? What you see here on the slide happens to be a picture of what we call an access industry or industry access. So these are industries that have 4 points of access for risk. You have the employee-to-employee risk, you have the employee-to-customer risk, you have the employee-to-vendor risk, and you have the employee-to-the-public risk. You typically find these in the hospitality, retail, and restaurant industries. Very high-risk businesses, a lot of turnover, a lot of potential for litigation. So what we want to do is help you find a balance in your risk mitigation program or to develop a program that meets those requirements. Okay, so how about the other benefits? The bottom line is if you can proactively filter out those hires that do not fit your culture or represent a risk, you will save money. So let's look at two things. You're mitigating risk for litigation purposes. Obviously, if you can keep yourself out of a litigious situation, you will be avoiding all the costs associated with litigious situations. But you also have other considerations in place. Let's take a look at a statistic down below. A hiring mistake could cost the company up to 5 times a bad hire's annual salary. That's a big number. And what we want to do, again, is help you filter out those folks. Some statistics suggest that up to 80% of turnover is due to bad hiring decisions. So 80% of your effort could be wasted if you're screening incorrectly. A proper screening program can reduce this rate. So what we want to do is we want to help you identify how best to mitigate risk and properly screen those candidates that are coming through the pipeline. If we can help you mitigate those folks that do not meet your cultural needs or provide a certain level of risk, we can help you build a better employee pool, a safer workplace, and save money. What about theft and fraud? So for you retailers and restaurateurs, are you struggling with shrinkage? Shrinkage is a main concern within those industries and other industries as well. But are you struggling with that? A background screening program can help you avoid shrinkage or help you reduce shrinkage to minimum levels, which is part of the approach that we use. $50 billion are lost annually due to employee theft and fraud. Embezzlement losses alone exceed $4 billion annually. Huge statistic. Who is this person that you are about to bring into your family? This is one of the factors that can be done and can be filtered out through a background screening program. What about lost productivity because an applicant didn't have experience as they suggested on their resume or their application? So beyond reducing the shrinkage costs, we can bring better candidates in and reduce fraud as well through a verifications process. Background screening programs typically have two major components to them. They have a criminal component and they have a verification component. The criminal component is reducing direct risk. So direct risk could mean things like assault records, sexual offense type records. Verifications and fraud come with the verification. We want to make sure that your applicants are who they say they were. They had the jobs they said they have the experience they said they have. They've gone to the schools and have the education that they said they have. And they're not using those types of titles and experiences to gain access to your organization and then commit fraudulent behavior against your organization. How about available HR resources? So how many HR managers do you think have too much time on their hands with nothing to do? Well, my guess is that we can answer that simply. There are no HR managers or departments that have too much time on their hands and nothing to do. So what we want to do is try to reduce that administrative burden. And we can help you reduce that administrative burden by implementing a proper screening program that is hiring better candidates, bringing them through the process, and activating them on board quicker. Okay. How does it feel to constantly trying to backfill positions that you've just hired for? How about the onboarding costs that have changed back to your department? How about time management bandwidth? What about the big one, administrative burden? These are the items that we can help you reduce. So there are three major factors that a good program will help you do. Number one, reduce your total cost of ownership. Number two, reduce your administrative burden. And number three, increase the level of risk that's mitigated through the process. So by reducing administrative burden, we can reduce your onboarding costs and allow you to spend more time developing team building and corporate culture initiatives. So let's take a look at a simple equation. It helps bring home the impact of proper hiring. So the cost of high turnover. So you can see the cost of realization is through several bullet points. Lower productivity is a cost. Overworked remaining staff is a cost. A lost knowledge base is a cost. Training, continued training is a cost. Interviewing costs, recruiter costs, and legal expenses. Let's talk about lower productivity. If your employee pool has no tenure because the turnover rate is so high, or you're making improper hiring decisions, you're constantly in a training mode. And because you're constantly in a training mode, your productivity is going to be less than optimal. Okay? Some of your staff that's overworked, their morale is going to be down. They're going to be burnt out. You might have to have 1.5 to 2 times folks on staff because you're constantly training people and trying to transfer whatever knowledge you do have in the organization. So what we want to try to do is help get you to a point where you're making better hires through the screening process, onboarding them, and then their tenure would be much longer with your organization. They'll be much more productive, they'll be much more innovative, and they'll be engaged. And if you look to the left, you can see a simple equation. Of course, we use the $2,500 per new hire. This is kind of an industry average that's calculated. We have clients that spend $1,500. We have clients that spend $7,500 per hire. There are even much larger calculations as well, depending on the industry and what they're doing for the employee through the process. But if you simply look at the simple math here, in a 500 employee company with 100% turnover, it gives you 500 new hires per year at the $2,500 per person mark. You're at $1.25 million per year. Okay. Even at 50% of this, that number is huge. Okay. But even with a 50% number being huge, we all would like to say that we can reduce your turnover costs by 50%. So if we can help you do that through a better screening process, we can, of course, reduce your onboarding process as well. So cost of turnover is a very high consideration in implementing a screening program. Okay. How about morale? So with morale, if employees do not feel safe, morale trends low. I mean, when morale trends low, productivity suffers. There's a lack of focus. You start seeing absenteeism. So a background screening program provides the assumption of a safe workplace environment. Okay? If your employees feel safe and feel content in the environment they work in, they will be engaged more often. They will be innovative. And they will be proactive. So in total, the productivity will go up just for being a safe organization. Okay? Sometimes what we do in this industry to help people with that safe organization and the morale is we help them implement a recurring screening program. So most of the screening programs that most folks talk about and consider when they're talking about screening is a pre-employment screen, which is very important, obviously, before onboarding. But once you've onboarded somebody, they might work for you for 5, 6 years. Well, what are they doing in that 5, 6 year span? If you have a recurring plan, you can continue to fortify that notion that this is a safe workplace, that the environment that they're in, the culture they're in, is conducive for healthy working, for being, again, innovative and engaged. Okay? So if you had better hires, you would have a better opportunity to be productive with your organization. So how about speed? So speed is a good reason to put together a screening program. So the purpose of outsourcing a risk mitigation process is to be more productive, more effective, more efficient in the vetting process. So by leveraging an SME, subject matter expert, consumer reporting agency, an example is Sterling, you're able to turn that speed over more quickly, more effectively, and more efficiently. So again, you can then put your efforts and your focus on running your business. Okay, it's better to work at your business than it is to work in your business. So by turning over the program or outsourcing the program to help facilitate this process, you would engage a subject matter expert. Right now, we are able to generate turnaround times that are in the hours to days range, depending on what your packages are. Technology has advanced so far, and Sterling has had so many innovations in this area, that we're able to turn what could take weeks for some folks to generate a legitimate background check, or days, into hours. Okay? So if I can help you turn your candidate into an active employee faster, would it be of more value to you? Well, of course, because now you're generating activity and you're generating productivity from your new employees quicker. Okay? So selection of a more honest, productive, and effective team. So there are many ways to do this. So a robust package would leverage both criminal screening. Verifications will help vet the candidates to more fit your culture, be more productive, and generate results more efficiently and effectively. I'd like to move to negligent hiring. So what about the specter of hiring negligently, unknowingly in most cases? So having a background screening program is just the first part of the process. The second part of the process is to assure that you're engaging in this process in a legally compliant fashion. Okay? Again, leveraging a subject matter expert, a consumer reporting agency, would help maximize the level of legal insulation that you're going to have. Leverage the bandwidth and the resources that your background screening provider can provide you to help you through that process. So again, you're able to focus more on real-time business needs. What do background screening providers do to help organizations like yours to do this? Well, they provide legally compliant regulatory services. They fulfill for you. So the adverse action process is an example. Okay. Disclosure notifications are an example. Special considerations are an example, like reportability, ban the box, perpetual release. There are so many things currently in the regulatory compliance part of this process that unless you have an internal department or a specialist internal, it's going to be very difficult to keep up with these in real time. Both the federal government and all the states change their regulations constantly. There are new requirements that come up all the time. I mentioned perpetual release. Say California has a requirement that you cannot engage in a perpetual release. Well, most states are able to leverage that. A perpetual release essentially is a candidate consent that when signed allows you to do a background check on them as often as you like, as long as they're an employee with the company. In California, there is no perpetual release, so you'll have to get a release each and every time you choose to do a background check on somebody. In Massachusetts and some other states, there's ban the box regulations. Okay, so you're not able to ask a candidate on an application whether they've had criminal records or been arrested. Okay. Reportability. Certain states do not allow consumer reporting agencies to report certain crimes, and you're not allowed to use those in making a hiring decision. An example would be Michigan. Michigan has a no reportability clause for dismissed misdemeanors. Okay, why would this be important? Well, you might have two applicants. They're both from Michigan. Their backgrounds are exactly the same, except one of them is a completely clear background check, and one of them in their file has a dismissed misdemeanor. Right? You can only hire one of them, so you're going to be looking for a reason to filter one of the two out. You would not be allowed to use the dismissed misdemeanor as a filtering option. Okay. Number one, we're not as a consumer reporting agency allowed to report that. Number two, you're not allowed to use that as a reason. So what we do is we proactively filter out all of those items that are not reportable. So when you receive your reports, they're 100% regulatory compliant, and you're able to have a 100% regulatory compliant program. The reason I brought up some of these samples is that these are the things that your HR department would have to keep up with on a daily basis and change their policies and change their programs accordingly. Okay, so by outsourcing or leveraging a third party to engage in this for you and keep your program compliant in real time is huge. And it's part of the way that we can help protect against negligent hiring and litigation. Okay. Okay, so what about references and accreditation? Get a lot of questions about references and accreditation. References and accreditation work perfectly in combating fraud. Okay, a huge percentage of folks lie in resumes. A huge percentage of folks rely on releases. Okay, you want to be able to have an opportunity to vet out those folks, truth from fiction. So we can do that through an education verification, an employment verification, a professional license or credentialing verification. Okay. To help save time. If your internal team has to do this themselves, they're going to be calling employers, they're going to be calling education institutions, they're going to be calling licensing agencies. They're going to have to hope that they answer the phone. They're going to have to wait for the response. By outsourcing that, we remove the administrative burden for you. We take on that responsibility. And we're able to match what an applicant puts on their release, puts within the workflow, within the application, and match that to what the verifier tells us. And then we're able to flag that for you if there's a discrepancy. If somebody says that they were a VP of sales and they were really just a line worker, we're going to be able to identify that discrepancy and flag it for you. If they said they were an hourly person making $60,000 a year and they were really only making $20,000 a year, we're going to be able to flag that for you. If they said they had a certain degree and they went to a certain school for X number of years, we're going to be able to flag those discrepancies for you. The reason for flagging them is we help identify potential areas of fraud for you, and then you can have a further conversation with your applicant about the discrepancies. Okay, same with accreditation checks. Okay, what we're trying to do, or what we hope to accomplish, is limit access to those people that really aren't accredited, as they say they are, from getting access to your organization, and then potentially creating fraud against you as an organization. So you can see here 34% of all job applicants contain lies regarding experience, education, and the ability to perform the essential functions of the job. Okay. The other benefit to this is again, we're trying to eliminate turnover. So by hiring these folks, of course unintentionally, that really aren't experienced as they described, that is typically going to end up in a quick termination of this individual. And therefore, you have to start all over again through the onboarding process. So this is how verifications or reference verifications will help in reducing costs, reducing the potential for fraud, and the time and expense that's wasted through the process. Okay, a moment on alcohol and abuse, illegal drug usage. So what about drug screening? So drug screening is another tool for mitigating risk, okay, especially in your industry. So let's talk a little bit about drug screening. A drug screening program in and of itself is a deterrent. It's a deterrent for folks that know that they have issues, and they know that, look, if I go down this process, I'm likely to be found out, so therefore I'm not going to hire. So you do have a certain level of initial deterrence when you do have a drug screening program in place. But more importantly, we're talking about the potential of employees, customers, or the general public being injured or damaged through an instance that was caused through a drug-related mishap. Let's talk about restaurants. A lot of people do prep in restaurants. They're handling knives. They're handling equipment that's dangerous. Of course, the last thing that we want somebody that's under the influence of drugs or alcohol showing up to work. Okay, you can see the stat there, 2.3 million have admitted to drinking within 2 hours of reporting to work. Okay, 8.2% used drugs in the last 30 days. So we do have the ability as a third-party TPA for drug screening to provide you this level of risk mitigation as well. It's another component of a screening process. It can be done pre-employment. It can be done post-employment. And the technology has gotten to such a point where the administrative burden of these programs has been drastically reduced. So before you would have to of course, set up labs. You'd have to have chains of custody, which is simply a 3-page piece of paper that follows this applicant or candidate throughout the process. We now have digital paperless drug screening. So you no longer have to worry about the administrative burden of having chains of custody through the process. A digital PIN is generated. Your applicant only needs to show up to the patient servicing center that's selected for them based on their address information that they've input. It's the closest one to their address, and the PIN number, and they can provide their sample. Okay. Most drug screenings, especially the negatives, are back the next day, and the potential positives somewhere in the 3-day range. Potential positives have to go to an MRO, a medical review officer. That medical review officer interviews the applicant. The reason for the interview is to identify if there's a legitimate reason why they tested potentially positive. They might have a prescription, for example. Okay. So what are some of the other things that you're trying to protect against with a drug screening program? I mean, clearly we know the risk with regard to injuries, but absenteeism, huge with folks that have alcohol or drug issues. Accidents, assaults, theft is very large with folks that have either alcohol or drug issues. Okay, they have to find a way to keep their habits moving forward. Okay, so theft is likely to go up in those cases. So by engaging in a drug screening program, you'll be able to protect yourself against these issues. Okay. So let's consider the importance of compliance. We did touch on this a little bit in a previous slide. But I wanted to show you these. Take a look at these. These are some very large brands. These are real cases. These are recent cases. And this is an example of how even very large companies find it difficult to keep up with what the regulations are requiring of them. Whether it's federal, under the FCRA, under the EEOC, or for states, these different requirements and regulations change constantly. Okay. So Swift Transportation involved in a class action lawsuit for denying employment based on background checks requested without obtaining proper consent. Okay. It is an absolute requirement to obtain consent from an applicant or candidate, depending on your terminology, before you can engage in a background check. Okay. There are no options. Very important. BMW's policy not to employ anyone with criminal record within the past 7 years. Okay, so this is a very interesting one. This one falls under the EEOC. So not very long ago, just a few years ago, the EEOC's mantra was to be objective and consistent enterprise-wide. So essentially, whatever you do for one, you do for all. Well, that pendulum has switched all the way to the other side now. And it is a requirement to evaluate each candidate individually based on the roles that they're going to be engaged in. Okay, so there is no blanket rule that you can use any longer, and it has to be relevant to the work. So if somebody happens to have a record found from 9 years ago, again, it depends on how far back you want to go or how far back is legally reportable in a particular state. But if somebody did something 9 years ago when they were in college, is that really relevant to the job role that you're going to be hiring for them today? So it's 9 years later. Okay, that was back when they were in college. So you want to be able to say, hey, is this charge really going to impact the role that they're in? That's the type of review that you want to put towards each applicant. Okay. Dollar General's policy, disqualify anyone with a controlled substance conviction within the past 10 years. Same thing. That's a blanket statement, and everyone's individual circumstances aren't being considered based on the role relevance that they're going to be hired for. Okay. Energy Future Holdings settled a lawsuit for not giving a candidate an offer after a successful challenge of a background result. So under the FCRA, of course, if a record is found, adverse action is required. Either the employer needs to provide that directly, or they need to engage a subject matter expert, a consumer reporting agency, to fulfill that for them. Once the adverse action is received, the applicant, of course, has a choice to either dispute it or just ignore it. If they dispute it, they come to us. We handle the disputes regardless of who's engaging the adverse action, and we help them dispute the situation. If it's found to be an error, usually if there is an error, very low percentage, by the way, are errors, but if there is an error found, then we have the courthouse correct the record for them. An example of this might be an expungement. Okay. The individual may have had their records expunged, but for whatever reason, the courthouse in error is still releasing the record. Okay, so that needs to be sealed, and then the report needs to be amended. If the report is amended and the position is available, they need to make that offer as long as they meet all the requirements otherwise. Okay. So companies have to fulfill their obligation through the entire process. Okay, understanding the regulatory compliance requirements, fulfilling those regulatory compliance requirements, and then allowing the applicant an opportunity if it is found that the information that was provided was in error. Okay, some other things to keep in mind that fall into this area: credit. Okay. Credit is one of those reports, one of those services that are being regulated more and more every day by all the states. And many, many states now do not allow credit to be used in a hiring decision, except for some exceptions. Of course, there are some industries that have exceptions to that, and also whether it's very specifically role-based. So your financial positions, those folks that have access to money or clients' accounts, numbers, things like that. Motor vehicle reports, same thing. Very regulated, should only be used We'll walk through these quickly for you. These are typically the core services that most employers leverage in some way, shape, or form. Okay, your criminal history reports, these are the core must-needs of any background screening program. These are the ones that are going to mitigate the most risk for you. The high-risk areas are felony assaults and sexual offenses. These are the ones that you want to make sure that you're trying to identify and filtering. These are the ones that are going to cost the most pain if you find yourself in a litigious situation. Okay? And not just from a financial standpoint, by the way, but from a brand standpoint, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay? Social Security trace and address history reports. There are two components of a screen. Number one, identifying records. So sourcing or locating records is the first piece. Second piece is retrieving the records. So through a Social Security trace and other location processes, you're identifying or trying to find those most relevant areas where a record might be found in this applicant. And typically that's going to be where they've lived, where they've gone to school, where they have worked, or where they've gone on vacation. And there are processes in place that are able to find records in all of those areas. Okay. Verifications, we talked a little bit about those. Those are going to help you to confirm that this person is who they say they are. You know, who is this individual we're bringing into our family? We want to verify what they do, what they've done, who they are. Help mitigate fraud potential. Okay. Government watch lists, these are kind of industry-specific type sanction searches. So healthcare has their own specific sanction searches. Financial industry has their own specific sanction searches. A very popular one now is your Global Terrorist Watch List, which is found in the OFAC. Okay. Motor vehicle reports, we've talked about this. This is relevant to folks using company vehicles, drug screening, and then under other industry-specific services. So the news here, the thing to keep in mind here is that you should have the ability with your provider, you should have the ability to build unlimited role-based packages that meet the requirements of your company. Okay? And a program will typically include a series of role-based packages and a la carte options for ad hoc usage. Okay? They should be able to be bundled all in one package or one bundle, so you simply just press one request, and all of these items that are relevant to that role are run automatically for you. Okay? Okay. So let's touch on Sterling for a moment. So Sterling is very proud and happy to be a partner for PeopleMatter. There are three things, success factors, or items that we consider that have to be met for our program to be successful for our clients. Okay. Number one, we talked about it a little bit earlier. We are seeking to reduce the total cost of ownership. So that's not just the total cost of actually executing the background check, but it also includes reducing your turnover, which is going to be reducing your onboarding costs, increasing productivity due to that, increasing morale due to safety. So your total cost of ownership through the Sterling process will be reduced. Okay. Administrative burden, number two. Our objective is to reduce the workload of the internal departments or the individual that handles the onboarding responsibility. We want to be able to remove the process of trying to keep up with regulatory compliance, remove the process of managing chains of custody if you're doing drug screening, remove the process of sending notifications to applicants for those states that require them. Okay. We want to add e-chain. We want to make it easier for use for your applicants. So we're removing administrative burden out of the process. And then finally, increasing the level of risk mitigated through the unique processes and innovations that we bring to the table. Okay. So those are our success factors. We are the world's largest pure play background screening company. So pure play meaning this is all we do. Pre-employment, retention, risk mitigation, and drug screening, and all the peripheral services that go along with that process. Okay. We're in our 39th year, 2,200 employees. We do have a global footprint, which you'll see on the next slide. But we are a global company with a global footprint. How is this going to come to play for you? Well, for most of you, you don't have a global footprint. So the in-country, country of origin type searches aren't going to be relevant. However, you may be hiring foreign nationals here in the U.S. to work for you, and you may want to mitigate that risk. If they haven't been in the U.S. for very long, they probably don't have much of a history. So we do have the ability to go back to country of origin and do the similar checks from those countries. Okay. The 97% client retention rate. It's a huge statistic. We're very proud of it. And that statistic is a direct correlation to the three success factors I mentioned before. We are able to consistently reduce total cost of ownership, your administrative burden, and increase the risk mitigation at the same time. Okay. The next slide is simply just a map indicating the global nature. So we do outline where our locations are here for you. Here domestically, our world headquarters is in New York. We do have three other regional headquarters, Cleveland, Ohio, Denver, Colorado, and just outside of Sacramento, California. But we do have, again, footprint and headquarters globally. Okay. So how about Sterling's value proposition? Well, we do have 5 pillars of value proposition, and we can certainly go over those, and I will. But I did want to bring out one that's not on here, and I consider it to be a major differentiator and a huge value proposition, and that's perspective. So, look, for many of you, it has taken you decades to build your brand, maybe multiple decades to build your brand. is extremely important for you. Our perspective is that we're a steward of your brand. And every time we do a background check, we have that in mind. Just one bad hire can wipe away decades of brand building. Could you just imagine, and I'll use some big brands for an example, could you just imagine if Walt Disney showed up in the news, CNN, the newspaper, the web, that they hired a sexual offender and that turned out to be an issue for them? Their brand as family safe, family secure would be impacted negatively. That's a situation that they want to avoid. We want to be able to be the ones to steward those brands for you. So it really comes down to some perspective. We're not simply generating a background, generating a report, and then invoicing. We're doing each background check with the perspective that you have worked very hard to build your brand. You've asked us to be stewards of this brand, and we want to help you ensure that that brand stay intact. Okay, so that in and of itself is a huge value proposition. Some of these other ones are just as important, but they're underneath the covers, if you will. Compliance, domestic and global. Sterling has a 100% regulatory compliance record. Okay, you're probably seeing all kinds of articles in the news today about trouble that background screening companies are getting into by cutting corners, by avoiding the regulatory compliance updates, or not quickly enough updating their client portals to accommodate them. Sterling is a leader in the industry in regulatory compliance. We have an in-house compliance department that does nothing but seek out updates, very granular, even down to the city level. Okay, so there are some requirements that it can be found even at the municipality level. So it gets very granular, and if you want to protect your clients, this is what's required. Applicant and customer experience. None of this is going to be of any use if HR managers are unable to use the system or applicants are unable to interact with the system. So we spend a considerable amount of time, both in integrated solutions and web-based solutions, in making the applicant and customer experiences user-friendly, minimizing clicks, minimizing processes, gathering only that information that's required. So in our program, we have the ability to select those items that are required based on the states that you live in. Okay, so your applicants are not receiving requirements or requests for information that's not relevant to what's legally allowable in the states they live in. Data security is huge. Okay, we have disaster recovery plans and locations. Okay, Atlanta is our backup data center. So if anything were to happen at corporate or any one of the regional offices that also house data and use data, we have our backup facility in Atlanta, Georgia. Okay, we're ISO certified, SAS certified, so we're able to provide our credentialing about how we engage in data. Okay, we're talking about people's lives here. When you're talking about names, date of birth, social security number, and address, those are the only things that you need to take someone's identity. So, and we happen to collect all of them in what we do. So our data is very secure, and we spend a lot of time and a lot of financial resources on protecting that data. Process and technology innovation. One of the things about being, and it also goes into the financial stability here, so one of the things about being the largest pure play background screening company in the industry, it isn't about being the largest. That's not the reason to bring that to the forefront. The reason for being the largest pure play is that 100% of our financial and human resources go towards innovation for specific background screening, both pre-employment and retention screening. We don't have other businesses that we run that we have to share financial resources with or human resources with. Everybody within Sterling is focused on one goal, which is to advance the background screening processes. Okay, and that's where the financial stability fuels the innovation for continuous improvement. Okay. So a little bit about how background checks have changed. So in the 70s and 80s, and this goes all the way back to our founder. So Billy Greenblatt, our founder, he's still the CEO of the company. He actually started the company back in 1975 by walking up and down New York, Fifth Avenue, asking people if they would like to buy lie detector tests for their candidates. And that's how we started the business, is doing lie detector testing as a background check. So once the 70s were over, the 80s started moving in, that became an illegal process to use lie detector testing for pre-employment screening. And most of the industry, most of the companies at that time were in the financial industry. Okay. As the 80s started moving through, criminal background checks and drug testing started happening. It evolved into something close to what might be happening today with regard to a background check and a drug screen. More and more businesses started using it to mitigate risk. I mean, literally just 5 years ago, the litigious environment of this country was different than it is today. Today, it is very litigious. It's a huge industry. It's a moneymaker for those folks that are in the litigious business. And things have changed. So now technology has to be used more and more. It needs to be faster. It needs to be more accurate. It needs to be easier to use, easier to analyze, easier to report against. And that's kind of how it has moved towards today, between today and 2014, or between 2000 and 2014. We moved from faxing to now virtual submissions, e-invites, and automatic notifications. What you can expect in the future is more and more integrations, and that's where the relationship between Sterling and PeopleMatter come into play. More and more employers are looking for integrated solutions. It's easier, it's more streamlined, the experience of the candidate is better. If the candidate's experience is better, they're happier and more productive right out of the get-go. Okay. And the other piece about how it's changed is regulatory compliance. There are some things to consider in addition to what we've talked about before. I wanted to bring up a story about regulatory compliance, because some folks might ask about, well, what are some of the things we might want to consider with regard to compliance? Well, I would say that with regard to compliance, the one thing that I would consider is follow it to the T. Follow it to the T. Do not get creative with your regulatory compliance process. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So how will your background check work? Well, the background check through the PeopleSoft process is really a partnership between an employer, an applicant, and the solution provider. Each one of those components are going to have a step or a process in the background check. Employers are going to be onboarding them. They're going to be gathering applicant information. They're going to be getting the release from the applicant. The consent document that we talked about before is actually a release to do the background check. We may want to gather some additional information that isn't captured already. If so, we'll, of course, interact with the applicant for that. That additional information will be provided. We'll decide where the candidate fits in the scope of reportability. You know, are they a minor? Are they not a minor? Which states do they live in? And then we do our magic from there. We execute a drug screen if you're doing drug screening. We fulfill all the background check requirements in the package, and we produce the results back into PeopleMatter platform. So pretty easy process. I wanted to take a moment to thank everybody today for their time. Of course, I hope you had a lot of questions, and we'll answer all those at the end of the process, but I'll turn this over for a demonstration.
Great. Thanks, Anthony. So now I'm going to show you all how it works within the PeopleMatter system. I just want to show you what it looks like with the background check. And so what I have here is I have up an application process, And I am an applicant, and I'm going through that application process currently. And I've already completed some of the application steps, as you can see here on the progress bar indicator to the left. In the interest of time, I went ahead and moved through some of those first steps. But we do have, you know, a nice way here on the left-hand side to let you know when, where you are in the process, as well as down here. So what we're going to do during the application process is just get consent to run a background check, pre-consent, so that if you do decide to make this person a candidate and move forward with them, you are already in compliance with having the consent there. So you're going to answer whether or not you're under the age of 18. And then we have all of the legalese here from Sterling right within our system, where our applicant can just review this information and determine whether or not they want to consent to the background check, which they can do here on this page, and then provide an e-signature. So we are able to capture an electronic signature here. We are fully compliant through the eSign Act, and so there's no paperwork needed. They can just e-sign here and agree to a background check, and then they'll just complete the application process. Now, once the person has applied, the hiring manager is able to log in and review their application. And so now I'm just logging in as a hiring manager for Brookshire Brothers, which is where our applicant just applied. On my home page here, I have access to all three of the People Matter modules: Hire, Learn, and Schedule. But of course, what I want to drill into right now is our applicant. And so as you can see here in my applicant list, all of my applicants that have recently come through are here and available. And so I may want to go ahead and review this applicant. So I can do that here by clicking on their name. I'm able to see what location they applied to, our Sullivan's Island location, what job they applied for. They applied to be a produce manager. And then I can review all of the applicant information here throughout the entire application. Now let's say after reviewing the application, I've decided to go ahead and make this person a candidate and move forward with them. You may have noticed that as soon as I made them a candidate, a background check tab showed up. But not prior to that, because we don't want to run a background check on all applicants, only applicants that we are interested in hiring. So now that the background check tab has shown up, I can go access the background checks. This person doesn't have any previous background checks, so we're going to select a check to run, and we're just going to run the basic criminal check. As you can see here, there's a full list of all the background check packages that are available to my company. And so for a background check, you're going to need additional information. For compliance purposes, we don't want to ask for someone's date of birth or social security number during the application process. And so we have a place built in here where you can actually either add this information as the hiring manager, as I'm doing here, or the other thing you can do is request additional information. And when you request additional information, when you click on that, it brings up an auto-populated email with the information that goes out to an applicant requesting that the applicant log back into the People Matter system and provide their social security number and date of birth so that we can proceed with the background check. Once the background check is ordered and this information is entered, the background check is automatically submitted to Sterling. So we will go ahead and enter this information and run the background check. And so that has been submitted to run. Now while we're waiting on that running, I want to show you quickly just the settings. And so if you go within the company settings, you are able to go ahead and update the settings for background checks. And there are a number of things that you can edit here within the system, so you can turn the background checks on or off for any of your various jobs. You can also change which packages are configured for your location. You can also change a number of user settings, such as whether or not business unit admins are able to run background checks, whether they're allowed to review the reports, and whether they're allowed to hire candidates before the results come back. You can also choose to run background checks on minors or not, and you saw that during the consent application process. So if you do want to run a background check on a minor, there's just an additional process for getting consent from the parents or legal guardian. And then you can also require background checks for rehires. And all of that is managed here in your settings. Now we'll go back in to our applicant. And, you know, by this time we've had enough time that our candidate background check should be returned. So we'll go back to our background checks tab. We'll click on View Previous Background Check, and there it is. So it has come back, and we can just click on that one. So if there were multiple, you'd have a list of all of them here. Down here, you'll see it says Proceed. There is also a caution, and so that would require your review. And we can set that up as a business rule where when it's a caution, it automatically requires the manager's review. And so you can come here and you can actually review the entire report. We bring in the entire report from Sterling, which is really something that sets us apart, as most of these types of integrations only will bring in just whether or not it's a caution or proceed, and then you have to go back out into a different site. So everything's here. You can review the report, decide whether or not you want to move forward and hire the person, or if you want to discontinue at this time. And then if you do discontinue, you can go ahead and manage adverse action right here within the system. Everything is all there. And so with that, I think we're almost out of time, but we are going to take a couple minutes to answer questions. So I'll turn it back over to Jenny.
Thanks, Anthony and Jenny. Lots of great information to take in there, and we definitely want to go through a couple of these questions. We've got some great ones from you guys. So let's just jump right in. There's plenty of time to still, we can stay online and answer some questions. So if you're able to stay online a couple extra minutes, just type your question into the questions box in your go-to webinar panel, and we'll get to it as soon as we can. So Anthony, let's start with you. There's a question here that says, what are some of the general best practices for preventing a lawsuit like the examples you mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. So great question, and it kind of touches on the last comment I made before we went to the demo. So best practices, policy, policy, policy. So what I would say is take the time to put together a formal lockdown policy for both background and drug screening. If you do not have the resources or expertise internal to do this, reach out to a subject matter expert, invest in the policy help. Okay, policies are very, very important. It's a growing document as well, so it does change as regulations change. Things to consider. From a regulatory compliance side on the background, you need to make sure that your policy is updated with that. On a drug screening side, you might need to have components for each state that you do business in. So if you have a footprint in multiple states, you actually might need sub-policies by state. Different states require different things when you're talking about drug screening. So look into that. One of the other things in connection to this, and we'll get into the next question, with regard to policies and background checks, do not get creative with your background check process. Okay, let me give you a story. And this actually happens more often than you might think. So a company puts together a policy. They put together a background screening program. They notify all of their candidates of the policy. You know, we are going to background screen you in this process. And they sign off on the release, allowing the employer to do a background check on them, and then the employer never does the background check. Right? They think that just telling them they're going to do it and getting a release is deterrent enough, and they're going to save themselves some money by not running the background checks. The major issue with this is that is worse than if you didn't have a background check at all, a policy at all. Okay, there have been several companies that have done this, and they've been litigated, and they've been excised with huge, huge fines and penalties for doing so. Why? The reason is that if you hire me and you told me that you were going to do a background check on me, and I signed a release to do the background check, I believe that the person to my left and the person to my right has been screened. And I have a false sense of security that this is a safe work environment. Now, fast forward, something happens, there's an incident, we get into a litigious situation, and then we all find out in the courtroom that the background check was never done. That would not, you would not be able to explain yourself out of that situation. And you would be very liable for that situation. So once you have, so the message here is once you have your policies, you have your drug screening program in place, follow that policy and that program to a T. Don't get creative with how you're going to execute that. You could find yourself culpable, okay?
Thanks, Anthony. I've got a question here for Jenny. What is the advantage of having background checks integrated with an ATS?
Oh, good question. So tons of advantages. You know, really, the first is that you can go ahead and collect that pre-screening consent right within the application process and know before you even move forward to someone if they're going to consent to a background check. So that's important to kind of save you time. As well, it's just important to have everything all digital, no paper process, not even for the drug screening. Everything's online here, as well as the e-screen and electronic consent. The other nice thing is that you can make hiring decisions based on the background check result right within your applicant tracking system, and you can even manage the adverse action if you decide to discontinue a candidate right there within the applicant tracking system, which also means that you'll be able to keep a record of all of your applicants and past background checks so that you don't end up reviewing a candidate that's applied previously and failed a background check, which will also save you money because you won't run a background check on the same person twice. Additionally, you can view the full background check report from the right from the applicant file, and like I said, that's something that kind of sets us apart. Whereas, you know, a lot of these other type of integrations, you won't have the full report within the applicant tracking system. You may only have just whether or not someone's a proceed or a caution, and then you'd have to log into another system to review. With our system, everything, including the full report, is right there for you to view. And what's great is that we do have all kinds of checks and balances put in place so that you can configure the rules within the applicant tracking system as far as who on your team can hire, manage, or make decisions based on the background checks, as I showed.
Thanks, Jenny. That was a great answer, great question. I think we've got time for one more. Anthony, this is kind of we've got two different questions that are very related, so I'm going to combine them together. Which lab do you use for drug testing, and what are the typical turnaround times for those screenings?
Okay, great question. So we actually have two preferred providers for drug screening, LabCorp and Quest. Those are what we consider the in-network partners. We leverage their patient servicing centers nationwide. They have just over 5,000 of them. But we also have other third-party providers, Concentra, local clinics, hospitals, emergency rooms. Some applicants and some businesses are remote and may not have access to one of those patient servicing centers. Okay, so I hope that answers the who we use part of the question. Turnaround time for drug screening. So your negatives should be the next business day. Okay? Of course, we're talking about lab-based urine testing or hair testing or oral fluids testing. Should be the next business day. Your potential positives could be up to 3 days. That's typically how long on average, let's just say. Average is probably 2.5 days. How long it takes for the MRO to receive the chain of custody, the potential results from the lab, and then reach out to the applicant to interview them to see if there was a legitimate reason for that positive result. If there was a legitimate reason, he changes it to negative and is reported to you as a negative. You would never know. Okay. If there was no legitimate reason, then it would remain positive and it would be reported as a positive.
Thanks, Anthony. We're going to sneak one more in there for you. A question here says, if an applicant doesn't consent to a background check, can you legally remove them from hiring consideration?
Yeah, that would be up to your policy, but absolutely, that could fit within your policy. You also want to make sure that you understand the state requirements. Some states have different opinions on that, but in general, the answer is yes.
All right, thanks, Anthony. We've run out of time this afternoon. Thanks for those of you who were able to stay on a little longer for us. If we didn't get to your question, we'll be sure to follow up with you directly. Our next webinar is 10 Common Compliance Traps and How to Avoid Them. That's coming up on May 22nd. We hope you can join us for that. And for all other information or to check out this recording, visit peoplematter.com. Thanks and have a great day.